I was about to ping Jan, actually. He added something to the agenda.
Okay. So today is January 20, 2021. This is a meeting of the Container Storage Interface Community. And today on the agenda, we have 3 items. One is the 128 character length limit. Second is restore snapshots to larger volumes. And then finally, GID mount options. Let me ping Jiawei and see if he is available.
Did wrong meeting invite go out to something? Jan is saying he's on the wrong call.
Oh.
Which,
Hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah, probably the link in the meeting invite is the old one, because I thought I also joined some earlier. It's pretty confusing.
Interesting. Okay, let me send out an update.
Yeah, a lot of people are on wrong call, actually.
Oh, well, that was my mistake. All right. Chmod, can you send them the correct link as well? I'll update the calendar invite.
Yeah.
Okay, correct link sent. Hopefully people start trickling in.
Hello.
Hello.
Hey, we had a bad link somehow.
Yeah, that was my fault. When I created the invite, I somehow copied over the old CSI link.
Oh, so you will send out a corrected invite?
Yeah, I just sent out a corrected invite, and we're trying to poke folks manually to see if we can get them back into the right room.
I think everybody who was on the old call is here right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. So let's go ahead and get started. So first item here is the 128 length issue by Jiawei. You want to give an update on this?
Yeah, so this is an issue that we have talked about several meetings ago. Basically, our current length limitation for a string is 128 bytes, and this has been proven problematic for node ID and several passes like staging pass. So we wanted to extend it. And I think according to our last conclusion, we're gonna decide to make the node ID 253 bytes and the and all the other passes 256 bytes. So I have made a PR, and it seems like Chmod has some concerns that the pass might be too close to the limitation of the Linux system. So I think maybe it will be like safer and less error prone to shorter that to 192 bytes for both the node ID and passes. I'm wondering if everyone agrees on this. Yeah.
Yeah, so I looked into Windows also. The window has 260. Although there are some cases where if you escape something, it's just possible to get larger paths, but generally the 260 limit is there. It's 260.
Is this also counting like all the other things that we put in the directory, like the var lib, kubelet?
Yeah,
Is the 256 including that part too?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it has to.
Includes, yeah, it has to.
And that prefix path can be arbitrarily set. Some distros might pick a longer prefix.
Yeah.
I was just going to say I have no issues with increasing the length limit. The only issue I want to point out is, or the only potential problem I want to point out is that some CSI drivers might enforce the 128 limit on the SP side, and so COs need to be prepared to deal with the paths getting rejected. I mean, of course, that would just be a failure mode where you have to, the path is too long and you have to update your CSI driver, but we want to make sure we have good error handling. So if you have a 129 byte path and the CSI driver rejects it, that you get a very decent error message that tells you what's going on.
So have we actually seen problems with the path being not long enough? Have any drivers
Yeah.
been?
Is it not? I think the error is not from any drivers. But so can you click the PR that I had on the description? Yeah. So the on the description I mentioned the second one.
So that's an issue with the node ID, but
Oh,
is it
sorry,
an issue
the
with
first
the
one.
path?
Yeah, there's one related issue about the pass. Yeah, this one. So it seems there are some checking happen on the gRPC or yeah, there are some check maybe happen on the gRPC or something. Not too sure about this.
Any enforcement that occurs would be on the SP side today.
But actually,
I don't think gRPC is.
Oh yeah, but yeah, I'm not too sure.
It's this Rexray thing that is enforcing.
Okay, yeah, Rexray, yeah. And also Kubernetes is also enforce the 128 for node ID.
Yeah, like I know node ID is a problem for, and then but like the path one, I guess if people are using the Rexray library to implement their driver, then they could hit the path length issue. But I think that still doesn't, like the Rexray library would have to be fixed, right? If they continue to use Rexray, they're still going to get errors.
That's going to be deprecated, so it will not be fixed. So actually, probably should send out a email so people can move away from that.
Yeah, I was just going to say that early on in the CSI project, I implemented like a CSI sanity test that validated enforcement of this limit, so that SPs were encouraged to put the error check on the SP side, so that we could conform to the spec. So there's nothing at the gRPC layer that enforces this, but the the SP is supposed to enforce it, and some do and some don't. And so when we change the limit, all the SPs are just going to have to stop enforcing the limit or start enforcing the new limit. And that'll be a, you know, a gradual process. There's no reason not to do it. It's just, it won't, you know, there's no quick way to fix everybody. All the SPs have to change that currently enforce the old limit.
So I guess the thing is if we increase it to 192, that gives about 60-ish characters for the prefix. Is that going to be enough?
I mean, in 99% of cases, yeah.
Because it's like,
Yeah.
isn't the path like var lib kubelet pods and then a really long pod UID?
Uh, yeah, it could be actually, and but it generally, like, so far 120 has been enough. But yeah, there are
Okay.
cases where
Like var
this.
lib kubelet pods, a UID, and then volumes. And then a volume name. I guess that's where the volume name comes into play.
There is some plugin name also in there actually.
Oh, there's a plugin name. Okay. Like, okay.
We need to put a cap on all these name lengths so that things don't grow crazy big. Plugin names shouldn't be super long.
Well, I think plugin name could also be 128, right?
Let me see.
Potentially. I mean, like according to the rules, but like, why would you make a plugin name that long? It just needs to be long enough to be unique. I mean, I guess from a spec perspective, you're right. Like if someone wants to utilize the maximum length of every field for whatever reason, and then necessarily that will force the paths to be some multiple of the max field length for all those other fields, then we should make it big enough that it can cope. Can I turn it around and ask, like, why would we enforce any limit at all on the path?
That's a good question. I think the only thing is the main reason is if the system has a limit. So like we're saying Windows has a limit and system D has a limit.
So you're saying individual SPs are going to blow up if someone uses an exceptionally long path, but like that's already the case today.
Could change it and make it arbitrary and say that for file paths, the limit is whatever the local operating system file path limit is.
Yeah, and we could enforce a lower bound and say like SPs must support paths of at least X length, and then if they support more, that's great. But like, there's no reason to put a cap on it. A floor makes more sense limit wise, because this is for the benefit of the CO to know that like they can always rely on having at least X characters of path to work with.
I guess the only reason to have limits is so that people cannot legally define their systems in such a way that it would be impossible to support.
So I mean, it's to prevent COs from like requiring that everyone supports 4,000 character paths or something.
Or no, it's to prevent like a plugin from, you know, implementing or designing their system such that they require the max like 128 for all of these fields, and they're following the spec, but like it doesn't actually work.
Oh, I see what you're saying. You're saying like if I create a 128 character plugin name, then the way Kubernetes is handling this will always fail. And so that's bad.
Sorry, wait, I don't follow this logic. What?
Like if we don't define limits,
Mm-hmm.
then the plugin can decide, hey, let me create, my plugin name is going to be 200 characters and it works on this one system or one SP, but then when I bring it to this other SP, it totally breaks.
Well, the plugin name is the SP. So
Or sorry, the CO.
within CO. Yeah.
Got it. So basically, it would limit the number of places that the SP can run because they may end up not being able to run on like a system D system because the path is too long.
Or it may not run on different OS like Windows.
But that's an argument for limiting the other strings and then not limiting the path length or putting a floor on the path length, because what you want to limit there is the length of the plugin name, not the length of the target path. The target path can still be whatever the OS supports, and as long as all the elements that go into the path name themselves have limits, then there will be a de facto limit on those path names, and if the OS supports it, then you're good.
Yes, I agree that we shouldn't really define a limit on path length and expect SPs to enforce that limit. That's sort of the job of the CO to do.
I do like this idea of not enforcing a max because effectively the OS determines what the max is, and we want to use as much as the OS will allow us to get away with. And what we want to do is have some sort of sane kind of minimum, and then try not to use too much with the prefix and the fields that we inject.
So for paths only, can we just invert it from 128 character maximum to 128 character minimum or byte minimum?
Is it actually 128 minimum though? It's not necessarily.
Not anymore, I guess, because we have.
Well, I mean, the way the spec is written now, you have to support 128 byte paths. You don't have to support 129 bit paths. But 128 is sort of specified to be allowed. So
I guess it would be like SP must allow at least 128 characters.
Yeah, so that you could construct a CO that always makes paths shorter than 128 characters and be guaranteed that will always work. But if you want to use more and the OS allows it, who are we to say no?
But then I guess, do we get into a situation where it's like, well, the spec only required me to support 128, but I'm actually given something higher.
I do think that's one of those situations where the plugin is shooting themselves in the foot, right? It's okay, if you want to be that kind of, specific on the spec, you are just limiting who can use your driver. Sure, the spec allows it. Sure, you can implement your driver like that if it makes you happy, but you're excluding all these other options. So maybe the comments around this should, specify like, hey, by the way, on Windows you have such and such limit, on system D you have such and such limit.
This is probably a situation where you want to use like may and should in the language of the spec and say, you must support 128 bytes. You should support whatever the OS will allow.
Yep.
And then I'm trying to think what the verbiage for the CO would be. It would say the CO should try to limit paths to 128 bytes as a suggestion, because that will maximize compatibility. But because plugins are encouraged to support more, COs may use more longer paths.
I think I'm okay with this for the paths. What do you think, Michelle?
I think that's fine.
Okay. Yan, Xing, anyone else?
I'm fine with this.
I'm fine.
Okay.
I guess, do we still have an issue though that today it's possible that people stick to the legally max characters for the fields and we can still construct paths that are very long and not supportable?
Well, yes, that's the situation we're in. And so as part of this change on the Kubernetes side, we just need to recognize when we hit that particular error and make sure you log something that says this is the fault of your CSI plugin, like get a new CSI plugin or, upgrade your CSI plugin to a version that conforms to the new spec or something.
No, I mean, but like the SPs are following the spec, right? Their plugin name is 128, their volume name is 128, but now they're over this 200 something character limit of the path.
What is the limit coming from in this particular scenario? Just the
Like system D has this 256
okay.
limit,
So you're saying that the
right?
plugin is
If
not
your
enforcing
plugin
any
name is
limit, but okay.
correct.
System D is going to make it fail. That's an argument for making Kubernetes economize on path length and maybe not store the whole plugin name in the path or hash it somehow. That's the only solution there is to just.
So I think the plugin name is already restricted to 63 characters for this reason.
Okay, maybe that'll help.
Yeah, but I think this again is one of those situations where CO could or SP could shoot themselves in the foot. Hopefully they will realize this before it's too late.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to change your plugin name or your volume structure
Yep.
once your driver is
I do
GA.
think the Kubernetes side also has some sort of truncation logic, but I don't quite remember.
Yeah, we
I
have.
think we do for entry plugins, but I don't know about CSI.
I think they all just go through the same common logic, but I'm not entirely certain.
We had the for entry plugins we have logic to truncate volume names because volume names end up in paths, so they're truncated.
Got it. Okay,
Also
I guess when we look at the Kubernetes side of this, we just need to make sure appropriate truncation is happening. Sorry, Hemant, what were you saying?
saying that also individual SPs have their own limits of how long volume name can they support. Like DC has some 64 or something. Like the volume name cannot be larger than that.
Got it. Okay, let's keep moving since we have a number of topics today. Next one is restore snapshots to larger volumes. Jan?
Oh, this is just update. I updated the pull request according to latest discussion. And right now it explicitly asks storage plugins to provide volume with the same content as the snapshot, but with longer size. So please, if you can review it, especially the English and articles and tenses and the usual stuff. And I could start looking at the CSI sanity tests.
Cool, sounds good. So everybody on the call, please help review the PR. And then next up is GID mount options. Hemant?
Yeah, so previously we discussed and kind of thought of using like what was that, a volume ownership as a general like mechanism that the storage provider could support. But I realized that like that is problematic actually because uh, the problem is that is like, for example, if a volume SP says, okay, I support volume ownership as a mechanism, and it does chown. But the problem in Kubernetes is it's not just chown that needs to happen. It needs to uh, chown the like if chown is being used as a mechanism, as an example. So in that case, it has to the storage provider should chown the volume. It should chmod so that the group can read and write to it, and SP should also set generally like set GID bit on the volume so that if multiple containers are running in the pod, they're running with different UID but same FS group, they can read and write to the volume. So it becomes like, so if you want to support a way of ownership, it gets fairly into CO's territory actually, with all this specific things like multiple containers reading writing, and I don't feel like it's the job of the CSI to embed all this information. Like it just, yeah, it becomes very CO and operating system specific, I think. And so I have opened a PR that kind of reduces this use case down to what we actually need right now. And what is this is doing is that rather than providing as a generic GID, you can specify supply to node publish node this thing. It defines a capability called volume mount group. So node capability that indicates that the node service supports mounting volumes with provided volume group identifier during node stage or node publish RPC calls. And I have added as alpha fields like volume mount group to node stage and node publish RPC calls. And yeah, so this simplifies. This means that this field is only for mounting the volume, not for anything else. So it encapsulates like all the CO specific bits we don't particularly care about. And
But what are the semantics of a volume mount group? Like, what does it mean to be a volume mount group?
it means that it's a string. It's a string group identifier. Like it could be a GID in case of Linux. It could be like administrator, for example, administrator string in case of
Okay.
Windows.
But if so if I'm handed a string that says, you know, some group name B
Oops.
Swartz,
So I copied that wrong. I'll fix that in this thing. Sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
if I'm handed a group name as an SP, like what what am I supposed to do? Like I must ensure that everything in the volume is both readable and writable by that group by some mechanism or other, or like I know that there is an implementation of this that just like sets a mount option and gets what the behavior you want, but like we need to actually define the real semantic that a CO can rely on, um, in case there's other ways of achieving the same goal, because we can't just sort of encode into the spec that like you must use this mount option, because like that's too inflexible or too file system specific,
Right.
right?
Um,
So
not
I'm just trying to
necessarily.
understand, like, is it readability and writability of everything in the volume? Is that what it's supposed to mean?
The volume. Yeah, that's a good question. I think the my current intention is to support volume like the group ownership as readability and like as current intention is basically support like whatever the mount option provides, to be honest. But it can, if we
Well,
get.
so for an empty volume, it's pretty clear what it means. Like, you know, you just want that group to be able to create files in the root of the volume and then use those files after they're created. So that makes sense to me. But like where it gets tricky is like when you have a volume that already has data in it that has been generated by other pods, and you know, pods are free to chmod and chown their own files however they want. Uh, and so if you have two different pods accessing the same volume, and one pod is like creating files and then chowning them or chmodding them to something other than what conforms with this, like how do you stop that? I'm just, or how do we word the spec such that like that's not disallowed?
Yeah. So in current use case, like, yeah, it's possible that uh, it's possible that a CO, a one pod or one container can chmod volume. Although for Azure files, it's not like they don't support Unix extensions, so it's not possible to do that. But uh, in general, it is possible that the one container, depending on, I don't have example where like it's possible like to mount volume with a group and then two containers like reading writing volume in such a way that one container is blocking other. It's possible if we it's very easy to do that if we
Well,
if
here's the example I have in my mind. Let's say that the behavior of the SP is that it creates a new volume at create time, and it is a chmod, or yeah, chmod to 775, right? So now it's writable by the group. And so
mm,
now a pod comes along and starts creating files. But if the files created by that pod have like a UMask of 022, now all the files are going to be mode 755. And so then when the second pod comes along and attaches to this volume and tries to write to those files, it's going to fail unless something is also like chmodding the files that the first pod created, as you go, or at the time the second pod mounts it. And like, is that what we want to, are we going to say like, look, as long as the root was writable by the group at the time the volume was created, like beyond that, it's your problem to manage your UIDs and GIDs, or your mode bits on your files so that they're writable by the group. Because if this is very vague, I mean, there's nothing defined here, and so we just have all these customs that Kubernetes is going to go chmod all your files recursively in some cases, but not others, and you're just supposed to know that.
It's really weird that we even chmod on the Kubernetes side. It feels like we're like jumping into workload territory. I know it's like a convenience function that's offered, but all these weird edge cases that surface, it just
yeah,
makes it seem like we're pushing Kubernetes into territory it shouldn't have gone. Like it's an abstraction line that we crossed.
so the pod cannot chmod volumes in many cases actually if after initial creation.
Why not?
And
Like what prevents it?
You need to be root.
But you are root inside your pod in many cases.
Not necessarily. The whole
No,
point
yeah, I mean that depends on your
of
security group and
script
all
is
that
you don't.
stuff.
no, if you're root, then you don't need this whole thing actually.
But you don't need to be root to chmod. You only need to root to chown. It's like I can chmod all my files to 600 if
No,
I
it
want to,
depends.
as long as I
It
own them.
No, it depends on how the ownership is specified. If you have only group ownership of a file, I think you cannot chmod it. We can
Okay.
verify it. Yeah. So you can certainly shmod your own files because you are the own both UID and GID is both you. But these files that are Kubernetes creates, these are like they don't have your UID, they have your GID, and you're
Okay.
trying to chmod it.
So getting back to your specific CSI proposal, I just think we need to like define what volume mount group means semantically. Like, does it mean that workloads that have a GID that matches what the volume mount group says must be able to read and write every file, or does it mean something foggier than that?
Mm.
Um, so that then as an SP author, I can go decide, do I want to use a mount option to do this? Do I want to play my own chmod chowning games on my side? Like, or in the beautiful future that I envision with Linux supporting like shifting bind mounts, like can I use that feature to achieve what the user wanted? I want to be, the CSI spec should be clear on what the expected behavior is, rather than tying us to like some specific implementation of using a mount option.
So the ask is to be more specific about what this volume mount group is supposed to accomplish. Like
Yeah,
what
define the expected semantics such that you could like write a functional test that validates that those semantics were achieved.
the that's a good point. One problem I had was when I was thinking about is like the readable volumes. Like what happens if like like for example, like volume was read only, and it interacts with like if we have specified group ownership and as a generic mechanism, not just as a mount option. So so you have like volume is being node published as read only, and let's say we don't use mount option, we use general group ownership, and that GID is specified. Then in that case, the we can only specify like we cannot make something that was read only and give it like read write permission with the group, right? We can only do ownership. We cannot change, like the storage providers is not supposed to chmod the files
Well,
basically.
you could just define that for volumes that are not intended to be writable, volume mount group only means that you need that group must be able to read it.
Mm.
And writability is only implied if the volume is defined to be writable elsewhere,
All right, so I can change the yeah, I can change the wording to like I can specify the wording to have it like, okay, we can, if the volume mount group is specified, then the volume should result in read writable by the group. That's something we can, that
yeah.
is, we can add it, that wording
And
language to the spec.
yeah, and it should be clear enough that someone could take that and like write a CSI sanity test that checks that that is the case. And then, of course, so the SP authors can figure out what to do on their side. Because
Okay.
I am an SP author and I have to figure out what to do.
There was some, yeah, that I will do it. I'm sorry for that. I was trying to use alpha annotations and I copied wrong annotation in the spec, but I'll fix that. So this is the one more thing I want to. So I will do that. That's one action item. There are other three item problems that I was thinking. One was what happens. This spec as proposed, it adds this volume group, volume mount group to both node stage and node publish. And I was thinking, what happens if node publish has different GID than node stage? Like the identifier is different. And
That would occur if you had two pods on the same node sharing the volume and they had different security groups.
two pods have, sorry.
I'm trying to figure out
Yeah,
how you would get this node stage and node publish with different GIDs. That would occur if you had two pods on the same node sharing a volume and they had different security groups.
yeah. Actually, it may not happen in that case. It's a theoretical possibility. Although what you're saying can generally node stage is supposed to be only once. So the
Right.
first node publish will get, yeah, the same, and the second node publish will get yeah, different FS group actually. So yeah, different GID. So yeah, that's a possibility.
Well, we could just say that that's not allowed. That if there's multiple node publishes, that they have to specify the same volume mount group as the node stage that corresponds to that volume. And if you get something else, it's an error.
Yeah, I was thinking we could do that. There's we have to obviously get the error code I and everything. And then other case was like, what happens if the volume SP does not support node stage, but supports node publish, but two node publishes, both of them receive node publish with different GID. There's no node stage previously done, but just this thing. So yeah.
You could make a similar declaration there that the node much like multiple calls to node publish on a published volume with the same target path are interpreted to be, multiple publishes, or just, a repeated, a retry attempt that you should just succeed immediately. We could say that, yeah, if the target path, oh, I guess you're saying the target path could have changed for the second node publish, but it's the same volume. And if they specify a different group ID, that there's no way to know if there really is the same volume or not on the SP side.
It some SPs have mechanism to tie volume ID, so there's a
Yeah.
volume ID there. So yeah, but I was thinking like, yeah, should we like disallow specifically in spec? Like this again goes back to like mounting the same volume multiple times, or using same volume on multiple times on a node. But should we disallow in general, like if the GID changes, even if the target path is different, we still don't permit node publish in that case?
I think the issue there is there's not enough state to know if you're violating the spec or not, because like you could have just rebooted the node and now the second volume publish could be for a different pod on, and the old pod is gone, and so it should succeed, but like there's no state anywhere that tells you that the old one might still be around and might conflict with the new attempts to publish. But like if we made a rule that two different node publish calls to the same volume on the same node had to have the same group information, it would force all SPs to be stateful in order to notice that even happened. and that's not a good requirement to put on SPs, because statelessness is desirable.
Yeah, and some SPs may support it actually. Like I don't know how they would do it.
Well, yeah, you're right. So you could leave it undefined and just say you're going to get what you're going to get, but that's not always great, because then that creates problems on the CO side, because now the CO doesn't know what it's going to get and can't guarantee that certain things are going to work.
Wait, if the SP supports like node publishing same volume with different GID on same node, then why CO cannot guarantee it will both? Like if SP supports it, then it supports it. It should work.
Right. But I'm saying, like, if we don't say anything in the spec about whether that should or should not work, then the CO is just going to sort of have to try and see, and it makes it hard to make any guarantees on the CO side that sort of some things will work, because then if you run into an SP that doesn't support that particular situation, it's just going to fail, and that failure will bubble all the way up to some user operation, presumably, and there's no remediation on the Kubernetes side you can do. You just have to say, sorry, I can't start up this new pod. But then the user will say, but it worked with my other CSI driver, like what gives, right? And now you have a difference of experience that depends on the CSI driver. So that's not great.
Yeah, that's, you should be able to tell that it supports, that the SP supports like node publishing same volume with different GIDs, and yeah.
It would be easier just to say, no, that's not going to work. But then again, if to enforce that, requires that SPs actually track this stuff and become stateful. So that's also hard. I guess you could use weasel words like that should not work, but if it does, it's okay. Nobody's going to care if you allow something that's not required. We could just tell COs not to depend on that functionality, but not require that SPs explicitly don't support it.
Okay.
I actually kind of like that strategy. We could say, SPs may allow different node publishes with the same or different GIDs to succeed. SPs should not assume that it will work. SPs should always use the same GID for multiple pods. Basically, the implication would be if you have two pods in the same node using the same volume, they have to have the same security group, or it's not guaranteed to work.
So one thing we do want to disallow specifically is like if volume was node staged with different GID, the node publish cannot be any node further node publish cannot be with different GID. That's just not, we're not going to support it, and that's clear cut.
But that would be on the CO side, not the SP side. The CO would never allow that to occur, whether the SP allowed it or not, right?
Yeah. But we need to capture that as error code in the language. I did not update it in the spec, but yeah.
Okay.
So that is okay. Yeah, that'll be on the CO side. Okay. Node stage, node publish, but node publish is more like there's a trick here. There's a challenge here is like because we have like
Okay, Kubernetes has all the necessary state to know if there's two different pods on the same node with different security groups trying to share a volume. And
yeah
Kubernetes can say, this isn't going to work, and just inhibit the second pod from coming up until the first pod dies.
yeah it can do for like the driver that support node staging, like this node staging, but node publish also it can do, but I think it is not currently like if it's not currently doing it, and it just one of the if the storage provider cannot really support that use case, then one or the other will not work. The thing with
But I don't think we want to create a situation where SPs can support that. We just want to put in the spec that like this is not supported, and you don't have to explicitly prevent it, but you can't rely on it, and there's no capability bits, so it's just not expected to work ever. And if it does work, it's a happy accident. Like that's the easiest thing to implement, and it's more restrictive in terms of what COs can do, but it's a good restriction to have. And then maybe later you could add a proper capability bit that you could query and then determine if you want, and then we could relax it later on. But I don't see any reason to do that. I mean, are there people running around trying to run multiple pods with the same volume in different security groups? Like, is that a thing? Or
isn't that already broken?
it is broken, yeah, but
yeah. Like, I don't understand why a user would even want to do that. Like, if they're sharing access to the same volume, it seems reasonable for them to also use the same security group on all the pods that are sharing that access. So like, if there's a reason not to do that, I'd like to know what it is so we can think about how to make that user happy.
I think the only reason I can think of would be they want to share data or share a volume, but not share the data. So they want to have subdirectories with one pod having access to one directory, another pod having access to a different directory. So purposefully, the permissions are different.
But like the way Chmod has written the CSI spec, like that would not work, because this is why I was asking about the semantics of the volume mount group. If the semantics of the volume mount group mean that the whole volume must be readable or writable by a particular group, then that use case is blown out of the water to begin with. Like if we want to punt this and say, look, this is a workload concern, and we're not making any guarantees, then we should be out of the business of chowning altogether and just say, look, this is your problem. As
the
for the
subpath
workload
thing doesn't work on Kubernetes, Sad. Like we chmod on the whole entire volume, not just the subpath. So it doesn't work.
I see.
One or the other part will be broken. It's just the way it is. There is I have to check actually, and I spoke with Andy about this, but it is possible that Azure file actually supports mounting same volume multiple times on same node with different GID. I have to check. I don't recall out of my, like, Michelle, do you remember if like what Andy said about this thing? I spoke with him, but
I don't remember off of the top of my head, but it doesn't sound unreasonable that it could work.
Yeah, and I know for sure that Azure file in Azure file you can already like, because it's a read write many volume type, you can mount it on multiple nodes with different GID at the same time. So that works, but I don't remember what was the case with if we try to mount it multiple times on the same node with a different GID. I'll check that offline, and I'll check that offline. It's currently like in Kubernetes, we are not stopping such pods from coming up. If it works, it works. If it doesn't work, yeah. Okay, so it seems like for multiple node published with different GID, we don't have a consensus. We don't know. Like I need to talk with Andy and do some investigation and like see how the wording should look like. Like Ben's suggestion is it may not work. We can add an imprecise wording, but I just have to look more, I think.
Unless we want to sort of force SPs to be stateful and remember like which volumes are published so that they can enforce the rule, you have to sort of be relaxed on the SP side and say you don't need to support this, but you don't have to fail if someone tries. and then the what that implies on the CO side is that you really should not rely on this functionality, and that you should just assume that it's not going to work. But you know, if you try it, it might work.
There's nothing like that in CSS spec right now, right? Like that.
Oh, no, that's what shoulds are for, right?
So we say just I'm thinking of wording, like the final wording, like node published. Yeah, volume. What was the wording? Sorry. If SP implements volume mount group capability and CO provides this field, SP should ensure that volume is not published with provided group identifier. Invoking if should ensure that or must ensure that.
I mean, you could say if the CO calls node publish a second time on the same volume on the same node with a different, that it must not send different group ID. You could put a must on the CO side to say that they really shouldn't do that, which would just imply that you can never support this use case of two different pods with the same volume on the same node with different security groups.
Okay, the CO must not call must not call node publish on same volume ID with different.
Right.
Yeah. So it becomes a burden of the CO with different group volume group name, volume mount group or whatever it's called. Yeah. Okay.
But then implied in that is that if you do it anyways, the behavior is undefined, because we don't say what will happen. We just say that you must not do it.
That sounds fine to me. I will check with Andy and actually, yeah, that sounds fine. And I'll check with Andy if we want to go extreme opposite, and you want to explicitly like loosen the whole requirement and support it, basically not have anything in CSI spec that prevents this from happening. Like in that case, though, like we are a little bit screwed if storage provider does not support it, then Kubernetes or CO doesn't have a way of knowing if it will work or it will not work.
But like if we come to that point, we would add the capability. But that suggests that we want to allow this use case, and right now we're saying no, we don't want to allow this use case. So we could totally change our minds.
We add a capability that says, okay, supports staging like our node published with multiple this like add a new capability. Yeah.
I mean, as far as I'm concerned, this is the whole point of like the shifting bind mount feature that we need in Linux, is because you really do need a way to like have mount the same volume different times and shift the UIDs and GIDs into different spaces so that two different pods and two different security groups can share data. But like you just need kernel support to do that kind of thing, and it's not there yet.
Yeah.
Okay, we're at the top of the hour. Let's put a cap on this discussion and we'll continue it next time. Hopefully we have a better answer by then.
Yeah.
Sorry, one last question about the 128 length. So are we agree on the node ID? I know we're
yeah, I think a node ID is
length.
fine. I
Okay.
don't think anyone had any concerns with the node ID side, unless
Okay.
if anybody
Sounds
has concerns, speak up now.
What is the new number on the node ID?
192.
Okay, so just a 50% increase. But
Yeah.
Yeah, not a big deal. It doesn't really help us, but more is not a problem.
Okay, sounds good. And was there a reason we limited node ID down to 192? Because it's not a path, right? It's not subject to system D limit or anything else.
The only issue there is that Kubernetes has to persist it in etcd.
So that was
wasn't
253.
it 253
right
or something?
Yep.
Yeah, I think 253. I don't know. I initially changed it to all to 192 because it seems more consistent. But since now we're not doing this for the length for the past. I don't know.
Let's go with more. Let's see if we can get away with 253. That's fine. But if you're concerned, I think 192 is fine. I'll let
I think
it.
I think 192 sounds fine because it's like 50%. Yeah, growth.
Sounds good.
It should be enough. Yeah.
Famous last words. All right, folks. We'll reconvene in 2 weeks. Thank you. Take care.
All right, thank you. Bye.
Bye.